Good evening and welcome to the 2020 Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame induction ceremony. My name is Laura Parr, and I am the president of the board of directors for the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame. Of course, this year looks and feels a lot different than our previous three ceremonies. Over the years, this has been a truly magical evening, as more than 300 people have gathered in Helena to celebrate each class of Hall of Fame inductees. The evening is always filled with such gratitude, inspiration, heartwarming stories, friends, family, and spirits. So please, tonight, feel free to grab your favorite beverage, clap, cheer, give standing ovations in your living room or around your dining room table, because tonight, this is a celebration of some really amazing individuals. This evening always fills me and all of us really with pride to be a part of this great state as we show our thanks to those individuals who have helped shape our Montana to be what it is today. The work of the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame is to honor individuals who have made significant and lasting contributions to the restoration and conservation of Montana's wildlife and wild places for the purpose of public awareness and education. We hope that the stories of these individuals fill you with hope, gratitude, inspiration, and courage. These are the ingredients that we all can use these days to contribute to work to protect our wildlands, our wild fisheries, wildlife, and recreational opportunities. Our friend, Jim Posowitz, was the visionary behind the Hall of Fame, and on a daily basis filled us with hope, gratitude, inspiration, and courage. Jim's passing this past July has left the conservation community with a hole in our hearts, yet with so much gratitude for what he created and how he persuaded all of us to keep up the good fight. Jim will be missed. Jim spent decades working to understand and share the conservation legacy he inherited and to prepare the legacy he would pass on. He founded or co-founded 3 organizations to carry on his legacy: the Cinnabar Foundation, Orion, the Hunters Institute, and the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame. In 1983, Jim was one of 4 conservation leaders who founded the Cinnabar Foundation, Montana's premier conservation nonprofit dedicated to philanthropy. Jim served as the foundation's executive director until 2010. And since its founding, Cinnabar has awarded $9.2 million in grants to more than 300 conservation partners in Montana and the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. After a 32-year career, that's impressive in itself, with the Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, Jim founded Orion, the Hunters Institute. Jim is perhaps best known nationally as the author of Beyond Fair Chase, The Ethic and Tradition of Hunting, which is a pocket-sized text that became required reading in many hunter education classes. And I hope you all had good luck this past hunting season. In 2012, Jim was invited to speak at the Wyoming Outdoor Hall of Fame. He came back to Montana and knew that we could do better, and that we had so many conservation stories that needed to be told. Jim recruited other Montana conservation and history leaders to work with him to form the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame. And since 2014, we have recognized 55 outstanding individuals, each with their own unique stories and contributions. At first, the Hall of Fame was organized under a memorandum of understanding between conservation, nonprofits, and state agencies. But in 2019, those organizations saw the need to ensure the Outdoor Hall of Fame remains sustainable and viable well into the future. So last year, the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame organized as its own 501c3 nonprofit and elected a board of directors and contracted with staff. Throughout the coming year, the Hall of Fame board and staff will embark on goal setting to explore additional ways to elevate conservation stories through education and engagement with young conservation professionals. We will focus on an evaluation of the criteria for induction into the Hall of Fame, with an eye toward ensuring diversity in the nominations, diversity in review committee members, and the importance of elevating the voices of all communities. We aspire to increase the representation of tribal voices and that of women in each class of inductees. Their stories and perspectives are important and need to be elevated and shared in this forum. We will work to remain relevant and always be pushing ourselves to redefine what it means to be a conservation leader in Montana. If there is one thing we've learned in the years of spearheading this effort, it is how diverse the conservation legacy is in Montana. It's a story of many different voices and many people from all walks of life. Tonight, I'd like to recognize and thank the Hall of Fame contracted staff. Executive Director, Thomas Baumeister. Event Manager, Ariel Rademacher. Inductee Biographer, Tom Palmer. And Graphic Designer, Luke Duran. This was our first year as a board, and we had one meeting in person, and then we moved to Zoom, like the rest of the country. So I'd like to thank the board for their dedication, passion, and flexibility. The Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame board members include Stan Bradshaw, Eve Byron, Bert Lindler, Ron Marcoux, Marcus Strange, and Gary Wolf. And I'd also like to thank at-large members Peggy O'Neill McLeod and Bruce Wittenberg. I'd also like to thank everyone who sent in a nomination for consideration this year. All told, well over 50 individuals sat down and took the time to nominate a person deserving of this recognition. I'd also like to thank the 14-person review committee who throughout February, March, April, May, they took their time and thoughtful consideration of each one of our 53 nominations this year. Since our last banquet in December of 2018, Montana has lost a number of Hall of Fame inductees. So please join me now in remembering these special people. Pat McVeigh, Bob Ream, Bud Lilly, Tony Schunan, Dale Burke, Jim Posowitz. And tonight, we will be honoring the work of Paul Roos, who recently passed on November 10th. At this time, I'd like to introduce board member Gary Wolf.
I'd like to thank the individuals, organizations, and foundations who stepped up to support tonight's Hall of Fame event with a donation of $250 or more. Many of these donations were made in honor of Jim Posowitz and Paul Roos, specifically to sponsor the impressive awards that will be presented this evening, as well as the production of the program brochure. These organizations include the Great Burn Conservation Alliance, Montana Audubon, Montana Trout Unlimited, Montana Wildlife Federation, the Wilderness Society, and the Candida Fund. Individuals include Stan Bradshaw, Lisa Flowers, Bert Lindler, Ron Marcoux, Bonnie Ruse, and Dan Vermillion. Also, thank you to the many folks who donated less than $250. We appreciate your support of our efforts to recognize these outstanding Hall of Fame inductees. And as a reminder, anyone who has already donated $25 or more, or who donates $25 or more by 5:00 p.m. tomorrow, will be sent a program brochure which features full-page profiles of all of tonight's inductees. Please visit our website at mtoutdoorhalloffame.org to learn more about the organization and to donate. At this time, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the former director of the Montana Historical Society and our good friend, Bruce Wittenberg. As in previous years, Bruce will serve as Master of Ceremonies for tonight's event. Bruce, take it away.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bruce Wittenberg, and I'm here at the Montana Historical Society in the McKay Gallery, where 7.5 years ago, Jim Posewitz walked through the doors with a vision to honor those who have contributed so much to our outdoor culture and resources in Montana. It's been an honor to be a part of this effort over the last 7.5 years, to be a part of the planning team and help create the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame, which inaugurated its first class in 2014. It was determined that the iconic Charles M. Russell painting, When the Lamb Belonged to God, would provide the perfect image for the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame. And this magnificent painting that you see behind me, you will also see it on the awards that we present tonight and on the program for the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame. And like the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame, this painting belongs to all Montanans. In addition, the Montana Historical Society will maintain the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame records here in the Montana State Archives. Now, many of you have attended the biennial banquet to celebrate these Montana heroes. Unfortunately, this year we're unable to do that, as we are all aware. We'll miss breaking bread with you and having a drink with you all and celebrating these inductees in that way. But we couldn't let the years slip by without a celebration. So we hope you've prepared yourselves a good meal, perhaps a cocktail, and be prepared to cheer in your own way, in your own home, for the inductees of the class of 2020. I'd like to encourage everyone to take the time to read the stories of these remarkable people that will appear in the program and on the website a little bit later on. We can't possibly share all of the color and all the wonder of these stories here this evening. So please take the time to do that. And now, just to make sure that we all know how this evening is supposed to go, even though we can't see and hear you, we know that you're in your home. You're there with your family, celebrating in your own way. It's okay to make some noise, to cheer for these people, to hoop and holler, to give them the applause that they deserve and that they would have under normal circumstances if we were together. So please feel free to do that. Have some fun with this tonight. And with that, let's begin with the fourth induction into the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame, the class of 2020. Well, let's begin with the story of Stuart Brandborg. Stuart Monroe Brandy Brandborg grew up in Idaho and Montana, where his father was a National Forest supervisor. He tramped the hills near his home with a rifle, rod, or binoculars. In summer, he saddled up for the trips into the salmon and the Clearwater country wild places he long admired. The National Wildlife Federation hired him to work in Washington, D.C. in 1954, and the Wilderness Society soon swooped him up as an assistant executive director to Howard Zahniser. Brandy campaigned for the Wilderness Act by recruiting citizen leaders in Montana. He developed local committees with the Montana Wildlife Federation, an idea that sparked the creation of the Montana Wilderness Association in 1958. Zahniser, the author of the Wilderness Act of 1964, died just before the bill became law. Brandy succeeded him and was at the helm when the act became law, Smithsonian Magazine noted the achievement as the first time land was set aside for the specific purpose of protecting it from the reach of mankind. Brandy was the Wilderness Society Executive Director for 12 years and was a force in movements that protected more than 70 wilderness areas in 31 states. In Montana, Brandy worked for the creation of the Anaconda Pentler, Bob Marshall, Cabinet Mountains, Gates of the Mountains, Medicine Lake, Mission Mountains, Red Rock Lakes, Scapegoat, Selway, Bitterroot, and the UL Bend wilderness areas. In 1986, he moved to Montana to settle near Hamilton with his beloved wife, Anna V., where they continued to work to preserve the natural environment. They raised 5 children, Becky, Betsy, Dan, Fern, and Lisa. We must not give up the fight to save every acre of wild land that can be given enduring protection within the National Wilderness System established by the Wilderness Act, Brandborg said in a challenge to all of us. Stuart Brandborg received many awards throughout his life, and tonight we add one more, and that is induction into the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame.
Hello, my name is Betsy Brandborg. I'm the middle child of Stuart and Anna V. There are 4 of us living in Montana, but the 5 kids are Becky, Dan, then me, and then Lisa and Fern. Lisa's the only one out of state. Everybody else is in Montana and in the fight. I have to say something that's critical to this. My dad would have gotten not nearly as far as he did without the amazing support of our mother, Anna V. She was a force of nature in her own right. I think what our dad would want us to ask you is to make sure that your voices are heard. Political power comes from us. We don't need to wait until Washington tells us, or people in Washington tell us what to do or how to act or what to say. Each one of us can organize and be effective and have our voices heard. We all know that people need wilderness now more than ever. Protection of wild places and the beings in wilderness and in our wild places is more critical now than ever before. Engaged citizen involvement is more critical now than ever before. Our dad often used to say that the most effective testimony was always from someone whose knees might be shaking and their voices quavering. It's a brave act to get engaged, and it's a critically necessary act. Our planet has taken a beating, and everyone should be taking a laboring oar to help right what we have put wrong. Our elected officials need to hear from us, again, now more than ever. We need to be relentless to counter the challenges to wilderness and our remaining natural places. And we would ask on his behalf and ours that we all stay in the fight as he did, because future generations are counting on us. Thank you very much.
We continue tonight with Bruce Farling. Bruce Farling began making his mark in the 1980s, working as the Clark Fork Coalition's Conservation Director. With a degree in environmental science from the University of Oregon and an upbringing that included 8 siblings, the native-born Pennsylvanian was well prepared to do what came next. He tussled with the opposition for Superfund restoration and removed the toxic mining tailings in the Clark Fork sawmill site cleanup, and the municipal wastewater discharge, among other issues. In February 1994, Montana Trout Unlimited took notice and embarked on a new course by hiring Bruce as its first full-time executive director. Bruce amassed a stable of staff and advocates like none other in the nation. They joined the struggle to restore, preserve, and protect Montana's trout waters. Consider accomplishments that resulted in West Slope Cutthroat thriving in Silverbow Creek, once a toxic channel, second only in lethal water quality to Butte's poisoned Berkeley Pit. For the first time in a century, bull trout migrate up the Clark Fork to the Blackfoot headwaters. Milltown Dam and the millions of tons of toxic sediment entombed behind it are no more. Native Arctic graylings spawn in creeks that etch cattle ranching country in the Big Hole Valley. Bruce's willingness to go to the mat is best illustrated by his grappling with TU's bosses in the nation's capital. In the early 2000s, TU's national office decreed that stream access initiatives were off limits to the state councils and chapters. The grumbling suggested that deep-pocketed donors were offended by a national crusade for public stream access. Bruce would have none of that. We were not going along with that, he recalled in the Missoulian in May 2017. TU Montana led a national uprising that forced the national office to back down. Still, Trout Unlimited, an organization with a clear conservation vision, named Bruce one of its 10 most influential TU personalities during the group's first 50 years. Western Montana Conservationists conferred on him the Arnold Boley Professional Conservationist Award, and tonight, Bruce Farling receives the prestigious honor of induction into the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame.
Thanks for this honor, folks. I'm humbled and flattered, but believe there are far more people more deserving than me of this recognition from the Hall. Any achievements attributed to me really result from years of unstinting support I've benefited from, courtesy of hundreds, if not thousands, of volunteers, as well as talented staff who I've been lucky to have been surrounded by. And importantly, I've also been fortunate to have benefited from a whole bunch of friends and colleagues in the professional fishery community, among the best in the nation, some of these guys. I'd like to congratulate my fellow inductees, all of whom I've worked with or met over the years, except, of course, Mr. Grinnell. But this is a bittersweet moment because fellow inductee and good friend Paul Roos will not be joining us, having passed away early in November. So I'd like everybody to please take a moment, if you can, to think about the other giants of conservation in the outdoors who we lost this year. Tony Schoenen, Jim Posowitz, Dale Burke, Jack Tucholsky. These guys were lions. They were definitely giants, the likes of who we'll probably never see again, although we should certainly hope we do. So anyway, thanks again, and please stay healthy.
Next, we have the story of John and Carol Gibson. John Gibson grew up in Northern California near the Klamath River, which he described as an excellent salmon and steelhead stream. Angling is a vital part of his life. When his U.S. Army service ended in 1955, he returned home and scaled logs at Happy Camp, California. There, he met Carol. They were soon married, spent time in Alaska, then moved to Montana with the first of 3 daughters. After John earned a degree in forestry from the University of Montana, they remained in Montana working with the U.S. Forest Service. When they settled in Billings in 1975, John and Carol's interest preserving the natural world began to flower. Carol was a teacher in various communities and later served in the Montana legislature. Together, they were a force behind the Public Land Water Access Association's mission to help hunters, anglers, and others fight privatization of public land and waters and initiate legal action to get access restored. John served as PLWA's president for more than 20 years. Together or individually, the Gibsons were active members of many conservation organizations. But it was public access that animated the Gibsons' efforts, and most of all, especially access to Montana's rivers and streams. With the Getz Law Firm and Jim Getz, who was a Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame class of 2016 inductee, as their legal counsel, PLWA made nearly every bridge in Montana counties a legal stream access point. Some might recall, John wrote in a letter to the editor, the lawyer for the landowners testifying that his client owned the bottom of the river, the water in the river, and the air above the river. One could anticipate the anger building, but in typical John Gibson fashion, he returned a zinger. The court told him he was all wet with public water. John still strums his ukulele and writes songs. One memorable tune takes some liberties with Woody Guthrie's American anthem, "This Land Is Your Land." You'll hear a little bit of that shortly. But John Gibson writes, "As I was walking, I saw a sign there, and the sign said no trespassing. But on the other side, it didn't say nothing. Now that side was made for you and me." You'll hear a bit of that shortly. John and Carol Gibson were inseparable for 61 years. Carol passed in 2017. John retired from the U.S. Forest Service in 1987 and remains active in the Montana conservation community. Tonight, we honor John and Carol Gibson together as the newest members of the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame.
Hi, this is John Gibson. As you know, my wife and I are being inducted into the Outdoor Hall of Fame as a team, and I appreciate that because through my life I have been really lucky because I had a beautiful, intelligent woman at my side for over 60 years, and we worked as a team on lots of things. As far as accomplishments are concerned, Bernard Lee and I took over the leadership of the public land and water access sometime in the 1980s. And we were fortunate in that working with the Getz law firm, we were able to provide a situation where there is an access at every bridge on every public road in Montana. And I have a warning for those folks who might want to roll back those accomplishments. The public land and water access is still here, the Getz law firm is still here, and the Montana Supreme Court is still here. Thank you.
Next, from the earlier days of Montana's history, George Bird Grinnell. George Bird Grinnell was born in Brooklyn, New York, to a privileged family in September 1849. He grew up in Audubon Park, once the farm of renowned ornithologist John James Audubon. There he was taught by Lucy Grandma Audubon, who likely encouraged Grinnell's interest in the natural world. Grinnell graduated from Yale in 1870 and earned his PhD there in 1880. He'd go on to reshape the national consciousness and become the father of American conservation. There's little doubt that his travels about Montana often triggered Grinnell's unique understanding of the world around him. Grinnell made his first expedition to Yellowstone National Park in 1875. President Ulysses S. Grant christened the area as a national park in 1872, and between 1885 and 1898, Grinnell explored and mapped what would become Glacier National Park. Beginning in 1891, he promoted and later led the effort to create the national park. The unprecedented protection of Yellowstone and the creation of Glacier National Park in 1910 are in no small measure due to Grinnell's exploration and advocacy. Glacier and Yellowstone National Park are forever in his debt, as is the American bison. In the late 19th century, as wildlife poaching continued unabated, Grinnell wrote an article for the Scribner's magazine that lamented the last days of the buffalo. Likewise, Grinnell's Forest and Stream magazine called for more buffalo protection. Additionally, in May of 1894, the Boone and Crockett Club, acting through Grinnell and Theodore Roosevelt, influenced the federal Yellowstone Park Protection Act. Author Michael Punk suggests in his book, Last Stand, George Bird Grinnell and the Battle to Save the Buffalo and the Birth of the New West, that Grinnell's park and bison advocacy were the first battle over the environment in the United States and represented the birth of the conservation movement as a political force. Grinnell is the founder of the Audubon Society in 1886 and co-founder with Theodore Roosevelt of the Boone and Crockett Club, which named him president for life in 1927. In 1925, President Calvin Coolidge said that few had done as much as Grinnell, and no one did more to preserve the American wilderness. The occasion was a presentation of the Roosevelt Medal for Distinguished Service. The Yellowstone National Park, Coolidge said, was prevented from exploitation and therefore destruction of the natural beauty. Glacier National Park is particularly your monument. Now, 145 years after the first expedition to Yellowstone, we honor George Bird Grinnell with induction into the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame.
It's really wonderful to be here with you tonight. My name is David Grinnell. I'm the president of the Grinnell Family Association of America, which is a genealogical association. It's great to be with you to honor these inductees tonight. And thank you so much for this great honor for my relative, George Bird Grinnell. In honor of the occasion tonight, as the president of the GFA, I've composed a proclamation for this occasion. And let me read that for you now. Whereas the Honorable George Bird Grinnell, who has earned the title of Father of Conservation in America for his contributions as a naturalist, publisher, advocate for national parks, and a philanthropist, has been elected to the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame. And whereas George Bird Grinnell, as the native of New York City, received his primary education under the direction of Lucy Bakewell Audubon, the spouse of famed artist and naturalist John James Audubon, where he developed a lifelong passion for the natural world. And whereas George Bird Grinnell was privileged to receive higher education and graduated from Yale University with both undergraduate and graduate degrees and studied paleontology under the tutelage of Dr. O.C. Marsh, which provided him with the opportunity to travel the western regions of the United States of America. And whereas George Bird Grinnell was the author of numerous articles and later the owner and publisher of Forest and Stream magazine, where his writings influenced the people of the United States of America and their attitudes towards fishing, hunting, and the natural world, where he became a strong advocate for the establishment of the National Park Service, the preservation of both land and wildlife, and helped to shape the national wildlife and land management policy. And whereas George Bird Grinnell was the founder of the first Audubon Society and was the publisher of the Audubon magazine, where he advocated for the protection of avian wildlife and is recognized for his efforts to bridge the gender gap in the conservation movement. And whereas George Bird Grinnell, as a member of the Boone and Crockett Club, along with Theodore Roosevelt, they were advocates for responsible and ethical hunting and fishing, championed federal land management agencies, including the U.S. Forest Service and the National Park Service. And whereas George Bird Grinnell is recognized as the leading voice in the establishment of Glacier National Park and for the preservation of the buffalo in Yellowstone National Park. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Grinnell Family Association of America wishes to celebrate with the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame at the induction ceremony, honoring George Bird Grinnell and the 12 other inductees whom join him in the fourth class of recipients of this great honor. And be it further resolved that the Grinnell Family Association of America acknowledges with great pride the influence and contributions of George Bird Grinnell, a highly esteemed member of our extended family, to the conservation movement in the United States of America, and accepts this great honor in his memory. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.
Moving on, we now honor Hal Harper. Good work, politics, and a life outdoors are in Hal Harper's DNA. You see, Hal's father, the late Reverend George Harper, was one of the independent delegates to the Montana Constitutional Convention of 1972. A strong athlete, Hal would set Montana pole vault records in high school and college while honing his considerable skills as a hunter, angler, and winter sports enthusiast. And he possessed a knack for politics. In 1973, on the heels of adopting the new state constitution that his father helped craft, Helena voters elected Hal to the Montana House of Representatives as a Republican. What Montana seemed to me to be doing at the time was sizing up where it was and what it needed to do to get ready for the future, Hal recalled during an interview. In that 1973 session, Montana would determine the fate of more than 70 coal-fired power plant requests. We were to be the boiler room of the nation, Hal said. That's when we started thinking, is this the future that we want for Montana? Hal was defeated in a 1974 Republican primary, later switching parties, and then won 12 elections in a row. He'd go on to hold leadership positions in the House, including Speaker. He retired from public service in 2010 as Governor Brian Schweitzer's chief policy advisor and legislative liaison. All told, the University of Montana philosophy grad directly influenced Montana's outdoor policies for 40 years. Hal carried or sponsored dozens of conservation laws, including the nation's first River Restoration Act to explore damaged streams and rivers, and the Drought Policy Act that recognized climate change realities. He sponsored the Smith River Management Act that allowed the state to issue float permits to manage the then overburdened 60-mile-long Smith River. Hal championed complex water policy, state parks funding, fish and wildlife laws, and land conservation and restoration. I was always looking for laws that needed to be changed because of fairness, he told the Montana Oral History Project. There's a long list of recognitions that Hal has received, and tonight we add one more, and that is induction into the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame.
Many thanks to Phil Alberg and Evan Barrett for nominating me, and huge thanks to everyone who came to the legislature in the last 50 years and worked for a clean, healthful, and wild Montana. Induction is an honor and it's humbling because the hall promotes the precious outdoor culture that all Montanans share. This year, the virus is educating us on the fragility of human life, and crowds, including whole families, are flocking to our wild areas and rivers. But also critical to this heritage are the lives of wild creatures that hang in the balance. God-given creatures like the grizzly, goat, lynx, bull trout, big game herds. And the challenge to all of us right now is to conserve their habitat, the last remaining wild areas, without which they will not survive, listed or not. Recently, every state politician promised to protect our way of life. Now more than ever, Montanans need to be the firewall that guards this vision far into the future, stops wild habitat denigration, and secures and passes down our unequaled Montana outdoor heritage. Thank you.
Next, we honor Dale Harris. In 1971, 10 students from the University of Montana bought a school bus they called home for the summer and embarked on a 3-week backpack trip in the Great Burn to study its wilderness characteristics. During that trip, Dale Harris fell in love with the open ridge lines, Cedar Creek bottoms, and abundant alpine lakes in the Great Burn. He learned its history and how it was shaped by the cataclysmic wildfires that swept through the area in the Big Burn of 1910. Over the decades, Dale ran the Great Burn Study Group out of his garage in Missoula, funding it with profits from his computer business and then from a small nonprofit that he created. In 1973, Dale's Citizen Brigade issued a pioneering report on intact Great Burn values compared to the mineral and timber development in the area. He met with local retired judge to draft lawsuits against timber sales that threatened the Great Burn and won every challenge. He helped to include the Great Burn in 18 different wilderness bills, both in Montana and Idaho. In 1988, one of those bills passed through Congress. President Reagan let it expire on his desk, a pocket veto. It was the most devastating day of Dale's life. Despite the setback, For Dale, there was never a question of stopping his fight for the Great Burn. He met with forest supervisors, district rangers, loggers, outfitters, miners, and county commissioners. He always listened and respected others' point of view, no matter how much they might be disagreeable to him. Nearly everyone who knows about the Great Burn knows of Dale Harris. He is more than just a steward or an advocate. He's a peacemaker. His strength is building consensus. Dale has always thought about how the Great Burn connects one generation of people to the next. The Great Burn Wilderness has not yet been designated by Congress as a wilderness area. This is an important landscape worth its highest level of protections. The Great Burn is prime habitat for species like mountain goats, wolverines, and in honor of Dale Harris and his life's work, we need to keep our voices heard. Keep showing up, keep the faith, and keep the Great Burn Wilderness wild. Tonight, we add to Dale's impressive awards and accomplishments recognition as an inductee into the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame.
I'll never forget Cecil Garland at the Science Complex coming up to me, and Cecil Garland was the guy who single-handedly was responsible for the Lincoln Scapegoat. The Lincoln Scapegoat would not be wilderness if it wasn't for Cecil Garland, and he had a hardware store in Lincoln, Montana. He came up to me, and I was 24 years old, and he said, "Dale," he pointed a finger, "you don't know this, but this is, if you're going to really do this, you're going to have to spend your life doing this." And I thought, my life? You know, I was living one day at a time. So I'll never forget that. And come to find out, you know, the thing about the Great Burn is that it's in my blood. I mean, I haven't been back in the Great Burn for 10 years. And I can tell you, I can just visualize. In fact, I did it yesterday. A guy came to my front door and said he wanted to take a trip. And I showed him a map, and I talked about what I knew back then. Stuff had grown up a little bit, but so it's just embedded in my brain. Well, when you listen to others on the other side, if you're vulnerable at all, if you speak from the heart, then all of a sudden that creates an opening where they speak from the heart. Whether it's big W wilderness or small W wilderness, I think people need to care for place. And you know, another turning point in my life was I read The Little Prince and his love of the rose. And so I think it's just our obligation to serve, and so my service is all about this place. So no, I think it's a lifetime adventure, and I'm really glad that folks like you are going to carry on the tradition. My work with the Great Burn has been an amazing gift.
At this point, we're going to take a brief intermission to allow you to refresh yourselves. But wait, we have a special treat for you this evening during this break. Courtesy the Public Land and Water Access Association, we share this musical feature from Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame member John Gibson. We'll return to our program in approximately 4 minutes.
I'm going to sing a song this morning. It was written in the 1930s by Woody Guthrie. I've changed a few words, but Woody changed some words too. I tried to get them up to be pertinent to the situation today. And so, without further ado, I'll start off. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream water. This land was made for you and me. I've roamed and rambled for snow-capped mountains, wandered through prairie grassland, while all around that voice kept sounding. These lands are made for you and me. This land is your land, This land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream water. This land is made for you and me. As I was walking that mountain highway, saw a sign said private driveway, but on the other side said National Forest. These lands belong to you and me. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream water. This land belongs to you and me. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that brief intermission and the musical treat of John Gibson. We resume our induction ceremony at this point with a question for you. Who was the first woman hired as a Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks wildlife biologist? Gail Joslin is a 32-year FWP veteran and longtime wildlife biologist for the Helena area, and was named First Lady of Montana Wildlife Management by the Women's Outdoor Wire in 2009. As a young woman, Gail acquired a love of the outdoors after becoming a cook at an outfitter's camp where her father guided in the Bob Marshall Wilderness. She earned degrees in wildlife management and zoology from Montana State University under unwelcome circumstances in a male-dominated profession. After college, she began working on a 2-year grizzly bear project for the University of Montana, evaluating habitat and population dynamics. In 1977, FWP hired Gail to research the effects of dams, mining, and oil and gas development on mountain goats in the Kootenai River drainage, and then along the Continental Divide, Rocky Mountain front. The area was later part of the Lewis and Clark National Forest Supervisor Gloria Florer's banned mineral leasing on a total of 356,000 acres along the front. For the Wildlife Society, she parlayed seemingly disparate work to coordinate 35 other biologists' efforts to look at the effects of recreation on the Rocky Mountain front wildlife. The result is Effects of Recreation on Rocky Mountain Wildlife, a review for Montana, a benchmark examination of how wildlife responds to the impacts from all manners of recreation. Since leaving FWP, Gail volunteers to evaluate impacts to wildlife from the land, travel, and recreation and management proposals, which advocates for protecting wildlife security and corridors. When faced with more and more development, Gail told the Helena Independent Record in 2017, one's only hope that more will acquire a stronger appreciation and public awareness for wildlife, so people are willing to make sacrifices to maintain the integrity of our wildlands. Gail is a founding board member of the Helena Hunters and Anglers Association and Orion, the Hunters Institute. Gail's husband, Jim Posowitz, a member of the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame class of 2018, passed in July of this year. Among Gail's many honors, we had one more, and that is induction into the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame.
This is an incredibly humbling honor. First of all, I'd like to thank my family for their indulgence and tolerance over all these years while I indulged my passion for Montana's wildlife and its landscapes. Thanks too to all of you MOHF staff, volunteers, and inductees who carry on the vision of Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame's founder. Jim Posowitz believed that no state in America had as rich a conservation legacy as does Montana, and he preached that gospel far and wide. The task of conservation, though, is never over, and it's always challenging, and it's sometimes monumental, but it's always worth it. Now, more than ever, we must remember what my soulmate, Paz, advised. He said, as long as there is time on the clock, and I think he meant that for all of us, that we must stay in the game and keep our shoulder to the wheel. For me, this award is the brightest spot in 2020, which has been a particularly tough year, probably for all of us. But I want to thank you so very much for this award.
Next, we honor Bob Kiesling. To protect Montana land and water, Bob Kiesling has sought to connect like-minded buyers and sellers as perhaps the nation's first conservation real estate broker. A native of Havre, he completed a master's degree in environmental science from the University of Montana. For 20 years, he served as UM's adjunct faculty, teaching a fall semester course in conservation strategies to environmental studies graduate students. Bob's career began with work on natural resource policy issues as the executive director of the Montana Environmental Information Center, a cornerstone of environmental advocacy. That led to creating nature sanctuaries and conserving natural areas as founding executive director of the Big Sky, Montana and Wyoming Office of the Nature Conservancy from 1979 to 1990. Because of Bob's insights, Montana boasts the Pine Butte Swamp Preserve, home to Plains grizzlies west of Choteau, Crown Butte near Sims, Poindexter Slough on the Beaverhead, Aunt Molly Fishing Access Site on the Blackfoot, Flathead Lake's Wild Horse Island State Park, and Dancing Prairie Preserve north of Eureka, all under public or nonprofit control. Bob's most influential endeavor, however, was in the conservation real estate. He co-founded American Conservation Real Estate Company, the first brokerage of its kind in the country. ACRE specialized in private and public land protection that included tax investment and estate planning counsel. Later, he established Outlandish, a conservation brokerage with a tight business focus in the Northern Rockies and Plains. Bob intuitively sensed that real estate agents working in the rural landscape needed a nuanced understanding of local communities, their amenities, and their unique personalities. That allowed him to contract with the City of Helena to assist with its first $5 million open space bond program that preserved much of the city's rugged South Hills. Additionally, Bob provided counsel for the creation of the Gallatin Valley Land Trust, Flathead Land Trust, American Prairie Reserve, and engineered the donation of the first conservation easements held by Helena's Prickly Pear Land Trust. Additionally, cases in point include years-long planning effort for the succession of family farm that in part became the Lost River Wildlife Management Area north of Havre. In the Blackfoot River Valley, Bob helped secure permanent conservation easements to protect the river, which spurred Montana's conservation easement statute. Bob's stamp is not only on wild places, but in the hearts of the people he's worked with to conserve vital swaths of Montana's landscape. And tonight we place a stamp on Bob Kiesling as a member of the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame.
We're in the grip of a pandemic. Like most of you, I've been spending much of my life online. Last week, I took an online course in the George Burns School of Speech Making. And I learned that the secret of a good speech is to have a good beginning and a good ending, then have those two as close together as possible. I'm guessing that lesson is truer in spades when it comes to speeches where you're accepting awards. So rather than taking a lot of time giving shout outs to the people who have been my mentors, friends, and fellow travelers, I just want to give a tip of the hat to the many friends and mentors who are already in the Outdoor Hall of Fame. Among them are my graduate school professors and my early colleagues in the nascent environmental movement in Montana. They were my guideposts in developing a potent environmental consciousness in Montana from the 1970s onward. But beyond saluting what has been, I'd like to offer gratitude and encouragement to the younger activists who are now so capably taking the reins of the institutions and the causes that my predecessors and contemporaries have worked so hard to build and advance. As any veteran tree hugger can attest, conservation achievements are seldom about me, they're about we. Over the past 5 decades of my conservation work in Montana, I've witnessed remarkable growth and increasing capabilities of many organizations tackling many issues. In the aggregate, these organizations and the dedicated people who power them comprise a legion of activists whose care for our state provides great and growing confidence for the future of Montana. I'm tickled to accept a seat in the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame, but only on the condition that all of you watching this remotely now raise your hand and vow to never, ever let up in the quest for a cleaner, more healthful, and sustainable planet. Come on now, let me see a show of hands. Excellent. I can see that we've achieved critical mass. And again, I want to thank you one and all for this honor.
We continue with Paul Roos. Fishing's mostly about figuring out things in opposition. It's too sunny, it's too deep, it's too windy. Stick with it. You realize that's the way it is always. And poof, obstacles vanish. That's a bit like how Paul Roos emerged as Montana's most influential outfitter and fly fishing conservationist. In recalling Paul's approach to tangled environmental issues to Big Sky Journal in 2018, friend Becky Garland surmised, tough issues didn't seem so tough when Paul was in the room. As a student at Carroll College and during his final year teaching, Paul spent summers in West Yellowstone under the tutelage of outfitter Pat Barnes. Pat turned me on to fishing outfitting and taught me that conservation and good business go hand in hand, Paul told a reporter. In 1969, Paul returned to Lincoln with a growing family to become the Lincoln School principal. He'd spend summers as a Blackfoot River fishing guide. That endeavor became Paul Roos Outfitters, which eventually acquired a reputation as a Blackfoot Valley restoration think tank. In 1975, a dam burst on the Blackfoot River headwaters, spilling 100,000 tons of toxic mine tailings into the river. Montana Fish and Game ended stocking rivers in 1974, so the catastrophe in part exposed why wild trout didn't return to the Blackfoot as expected. Paul recognized the considerable challenge the river faced: mining, antiquated irrigation, logging, grazing, and overfishing among them. In 1986, when the Sunshine Mining Company proposed an open pit gold mine downstream from Lincoln, Paul and others got busy. He helped form the Blackfoot chapter of Trout Unlimited to focus on restoring the wild trout by working with landowners, public agencies. Since 1987, TU and more than 200 landowners have completed 700 projects, ranging from stream restoration to grazing management. In the Middle Blackfoot River, native trout numbers increased by 800%. One mended ranch led to another, which led to the creation of the Blackfoot Challenge in 1993. Paul helped the nonprofit to include mining and timber companies, state and federal agents, ranchers, recreationists, guides, outfitters, local businesses, and landowners. Today, the Blackfoot Challenge's ridge-to-ridge collaboration is a national model for preserving an entire watershed's rural characteristics and natural setting. Paul helped found the Fishing Outfitters Association of Montana, served as director of the Clark Fork Coalition, and on the advisory council of Private Lands Public Wildlife, and co-chaired the Lincoln co-chaired the Lincoln Forest Restoration Committee. In the late 1990s, Paul was part of a group that stopped a gold mine development at the Blackfoot River headwaters and championed a voter initiative that ended cyanide heap leach mining in Montana. He helped to create Lincoln's outdoor sculpture park, the Blackfoot Pathways Sculpture in the Wild, and helped establish the Lincoln Community River Park. Paul passed after a brief illness in November of this year, with his wife Bonnie and his daughters at his side, Kathy, Paula, Shomei, and Lee. And it is my honor tonight to induct my friend, Paul Roos, into the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame.
It is a privilege and honor to accept this award for my father, Paul Roos, who passed away on November 10th. I am Paul's oldest daughter, Kathy, and I am the voice of my sisters, Paula, Shomei, and Lee, our mother, Kay, 8 grandkids, Dad's deceased wife, Carolyn, and Dad's wife, Bonnie. Thank you to all of those of you who are behind the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame, and thank you to the person who nominated my dad, Paul. What an amazing group of people that have already been inducted into the Hall of Fame, and those that are being inducted this year. I'm so glad Dad knew he was going to be inducted, and with whom he shares the honor. Dad would be so humbled that he was included in such an active and productive group of outdoor advocates, and I am humbled to speak for him. Brandon Bodecker, the current owner of Paul Roos Outfitter, or Pro, sent me a video filmed by Adventure Guides titled Return to the River, Part 2, Blackfoot River, Montana. As many of you likely know, the video, filmed about 9 years ago, was a celebration of the amazing resurgence of the Blackfoot River and its tributaries. Dad was a part of the video, and he helped viewers understand the extent of the work completed in the Blackfoot River Valley by stating, "We did studies and determined that we got some problems. I would estimate we've completed 40 to 50 projects. We've replaced culverts. We've removed barnyards out of streams. We've literally put streams back where they were and restored the fishery in 350 miles of tributaries in the Blackfoot River." The story behind all this work was a broad-based coalition of oftentimes competing interests. At times, Dad has been credited with bringing this diverse group of people together, and this is likely some of why he was nominated for this award. However, Dad stated to John Dietz in the Adventures Guide video, "It's not about me. It's about everybody that was involved in the process. I know that is hard because everyone wants heroes, but that's not the story. We just decided to sit down and keep talking until we found something that we could do to help a river and a valley that we all love." Dad is receiving this award, but he knew how many people it took to accomplish so much. Dad's life was complex, full of energy, and passionate. This award is based on his efforts to protect and enhance the great outdoors of Montana, but like the river, his life was much more complex. Dad loved to share his knowledge with family, friends, students, and in general, anyone who would listen. I hope that each of you have been given a tidbit of Paul Roos's knowledge to make this world just a little bit better. He was adamant that resolving conflict begins with getting to know people, and that one person can make a change, but a community makes a lasting difference. This is a lesson of Dad's that can be hard to follow, but essential to getting the big tasks completed. Dad was often working on ways to support community, education, and conservation in the Blackfoot Valley and beyond. I'm finding myself thinking about these 3 priorities and know that if I find ways to make one or more better, Dad would be pleased. Finally, with a great sense of humor and a desire to show action To show love in action, Dad continually worked to become a better person. Many of us have seen that work, and he would challenge each of us to do the same. Norman MacLean wrote, "And in the end, all things merge into one, and the river runs through it." Dad's life on earth ended November 10th. But all his work and passion merged into a life well lived, and the river still runs through it. Thank you.
We continue as we honor Gene Sense. Gene Sense worked as a 4th grade teacher and a wilderness packer from his home in Shodo. That he can look beyond the prairie and still marvel at Ear Mountain is a testament to the Rocky Mountain Front Heritage Act of 2014 and Gene's spirited defense of the Rocky Mountain Front. In 1977, Gene learned at an outfitters meeting that the U.S. Forest Service planned to issue oil and gas development leases up and down the Rocky Mountain Front. The news of oil and gas rigs blanketing every acre of the Lewis and Clark forest prodded Gene to organize Friends of the Rocky Mountain Front. He knew deep down that the front was the cradle of one of the most productive wildlife areas in the world. What was it to become? The initial friends included Gene, a rancher, a taxidermist, an outfitter, a lawyer, and a backcountry horseman. The group pinned their front protection hopes on the Wilderness Act of 1988 to protect 1.4 million acres in Montana. When President Reagan vetoed the bill, it was back to square one. It took years of legwork, but by 1997, Forest Supervisor Gloria Flora banned mineral leasing on a total of 356,000 acres along the front. In 2006, Gene helped organize support to persuade Montana's senators to withdraw the Rocky Mountain Front mineral leases legislatively. The following year, the USFS issued a travel plan for the front that focused on traditional recreation and minimized motorized use, a concession that created daylight for Gene to expand the Friends to include the Coalition to Protect the Rocky Mountain Front. In December 2014, the impossible emerged with the passage of the Rocky Mountain Front Heritage Act. It marked the first time in 31 years that Montana gained new wilderness designation. Gene often credits his accomplishments to the support of his wife, Linda. And he accomplished it all as a volunteer. He kept his loose-knit friends together via an email network, and there were precious few meetings and no membership fees, just a passion for the front. When a High Country News reporter asked a founding member of the Friends of the Rocky Mountain Front about the protection offered by the new act, the man recalled thinking, "This is Gene Sense's day." And on this day, we welcome Gene Sense into the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame.
I consider this a huge honor, and I feel humbled to be invited into the same ballpark with so many wonderful conservationists. For me, this is really about Montana's Rocky Mountain Front, that grand stretch of wild country that extends 100 miles from Glacier National Park south to Rogers Pass, along the eastern edge of the Scapegoat, the Bob Marshall and Great Bear Wilderness areas, and including the Badger II Medicine. It's about the thousands of people who have experienced this spiritual landscape and have fought so long and hard to keep it wild. For some of us, it's been a 40-year struggle, which finally protected the front from the main threats of oil and gas and mining. So, I accept this award on behalf of all who love Montana's Rocky Mountain Front and who have worked so hard to keep it like it is. Thank you so much.
We continue by honoring E. Richard Dick Vincent. Dick Vincent, an inquisitive kid who grew up in Norris and Garrison, poking around the Madison and Clark Fork rivers in the 1950s. earned a degree in fish and wildlife management at Montana State University, and joined Montana Fish and Game in 1966 to become the Madison River's biologist. Job one was to develop a nascent technology, electrofishing, to count and measure the trout inhabiting the fabled river. The system was an instant triumph. Biologists could estimate the number, size, age class of trout in a big river for the first time. With the new data in 1968, the Montana Power Company agreed to increase flows from 2 dams to help bolster trout populations in the Norris and Varney sections of the Madison. The beneficial flows helped at Norris, resulting in more and larger trout, but not so at Varney. The discrepancy became Vincent's aha moment. Out of the way Norris had harbored wild riverborne trout, while busy Varney received about 10,000 catchable trout, hatchery trout, every year. That was 1969, the peak of FWP's trout stocking program. 4 more years of Dick's study showed the unthinkable. Madison River wild trout thrived in reaches without stock trout and virtually disappeared in stock stretches. In 1974, state officials had the science in hand. The wild trout in the now unstocked Varney section ballooned to more than 200%. Determined to support the science, Montana stunned anglers and professional fishing managers nationwide. It would not merely stop stocking trout in the Madison, but in all Montana streams and rivers that could naturally support wild trout. Dick's work revolutionized trout management in Montana. Today, wild, naturally reproducing trout thrive. State hatcheries, meanwhile, focus on stocking lakes and reservoirs to the delight of anglers. The beauty of Dick's research in this certainty that the wild trout management depends on habitat access and in-stream flow protection laws. If you want to catch big wild fish, he told Montana Outdoor Magazine in 2004, then you need to fight for the water and habitat, and that is what happened. I don't know of any state where people have fought so hard for their rivers as they have here in Montana. Dick amassed more than 20 awards for his work on wild trout and whirling disease research. And now we add one more, induction into the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame.
I should thank the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame Board for selecting me for this honor. I can't begin to express what it means to me. Also, a special thanks to Jerry Wells for nominating me. I grew up around the Madison River, spending many days with my dad and grandpa fishing there. I never dreamed that one day I'd be the fisheries biologist managing it. But after graduation from Montana State University in 1966, I was hired to develop electrofishing sampling techniques and methods to estimate fish numbers. Fisheries biologists needed this information to more effectively manage. During my 40-year career, there were 3 significant accomplishments that I'm proud of. First, development of gear and technology to estimate fish populations in larger rivers. 2, using that information to convince Montana Power Company to provide necessary minimum flows for the benefit of the Madison River wild trout. And 3, develop a study to determine the impact of stocking hatchery trout on wild trout. Obviously, none of these would have been possible without the support of people like Bud Gaffney, Leroy Ellig, Art Whitney, George Holton, along with many co-workers such as Al Elzer, Dennis Workman, Ron Marcoux, Jerry Wells, Larry Peterman, and Norm Peterson, just to name a few. I also want to thank my many fisheries technicians who worked with me over the years, with special thanks to Jeff Baganoff, Wayne Black, and Joni Hupke. Finally, I would like to thank my wife, Twala, for support for all these years.
And we continue as we honor Vince Yannon. For 30 years, Vince Yannon was Montana's most popular personality. A lifelong outdoorsman, Vince worked for the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and became a conservation celebrity. He hosted television programs and conservation services, garden club events, and visited classrooms. And there he'd exhibit one of his recuperating wild creatures, along with the uncommon wit, charisma, and empathetic humor that made Vince a legend. Vince earned degrees from Adams State College and the University of Montana. He studied grizzly bear and elk with the late John Craighead, one of the leading scientists in America's conservation. Vince began his career in Montana as a scientist and educator in the 1970s. He helped develop Project Wild, a national conservation educational program. As FWP's representative, Vince partnered with the Montana Office of Public Instruction to establish Project Wild in Montana's schools. He wanted children to bond with nature and think things through for themselves. In 1995, Vince's FWP retirement was noted in newspapers and by Montana politicians. Senator Max Baucus lauded Vince for the congressional record. I rise today to honor a man who has made a life work in preserving one of Montana's hallmarks, one of the things that have earned renown as the last best place, our wildlife, Baucus said. I had a job that I loved, Vince recalls. I had two things that made it special. I love people and I love wildlife. It was a perfect fit. The vision for FWP's Montana Wild Education Center in Helena and its wildlife rehabilitation facility is traced directly to Vince's humane appreciation for wildlife conservation and education. Montana Wild opened in 2010 and now hosts more than 5,000 elementary and high school students annually in the Vince Yannon Auditorium. Vince was named Mr. Wildlife by the Great Falls Tribune and a local hero by the Helena Independent Record, and was the first president of the Last Chance chapter of the Audubon Society. Vince Yannon's love for wildlife and education is in his blood to this day. So we honor Vince Yannon one more time by inducting him into the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame.
Thank you for the award. What a great award. I want to say things that I promoted throughout my career. All animals need four things, and you and I are an animal. We need clean air, food, water, and a place to live. Clean air, we've had trouble in Missoula. We've had trouble up in the Kalispell area. Water, for goodness sakes, we just made a major change in the Smith River. We have a pond in Butte that animals land in and they die. Now, if we look at food, we're doing real well in Montana, producing wheat and barley. The barley because people like to drink beer, that's why. But we come to the pulse crops now. They are excellent. We're #1 in the nation with the pulse crops. And the last thing of those four things is a place to live. Wildlife, it's called habitat. For us, it's a place like a house, a home, a subdivision. We need to have rules and regulations on these four things to keep or better what we have now. We do not want the kids in the future lacking those things, and if we do that, there are great careers in wildlife. Come join us and protect Montana.
This concludes our induction ceremony. Before Laura returns to close the program, I urge you to think about the collective impact of these honorees on our state and our way of life. As we sit in our homes, staring at our YouTube, our computer screens, we can still give them the proper recognition that they all deserve. So I ask you now, all over Montana and perhaps the nation, to applaud and show our appreciation for the class of 2020, the newest members of the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame.
Well, that was just amazing. We heard from such thoughtful and dedicated individuals, and their acceptance speeches brought me to tears a number of times. I'm sure you can relate. I'd like to remind everyone that we hold this ceremony every other year in December, and the process for nominating individuals for consideration happens on the years between each induction ceremony. And this is an open, public nominations process. So anyone can nominate anyone else. If you have someone in mind to be considered for a nomination, please visit our website at mtoutdoorhalloffame.org and email us. We will be sure to put your name on our mailing list and let you know when we open the public nomination process. I want to give a special thanks to Bruce Wittenberg for the presentation of the awards tonight. He always does such a wonderful job. And I most of all want to thank the 2020 class of the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame for your passion, dedication, and commitment to our great state of Montana. May your life's work endure for years to come, and may your stories give inspiration and courage to others who walk and work in your footsteps. Folks, please be safe, be healthy, and happy holidays to you and your loved ones. Good night, and thank you from the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame.